Hello. Before we begin, a quick note. The Bore You to Sleep podcast relies on you and sponsors, which means you will hear a quick advertisement before the beginning of tonight's episode. While the podcast is free, you are welcome to subscribe for just $2.99 per month, which supports the creation of this podcast and gives you an ad-free listening experience. Simply click the link in the show notes from your podcast app. Rest easy. Hello. Welcome to the Bore You to Sleep podcast. The podcast that will hopefully help you get to sleep. I am going to read an open source book, one that is not particularly interesting, but one that is hopefully boring enough to get you to sleep. Tonight's reading comes from A Book of Bridges, written by Walter Shaw Sparrow and published in 1915. This story looks at the history of bridges. My name is Teddy, and I aim to help people everywhere get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important, and my mission is to help you get the rest that you need. The podcast is designed to play in the background while you slowly fall asleep. For those new to the podcast, it started from my own struggles with sleep. I wanted to create a resource for others facing similar challenges, and I'm so grateful for the amazing community we have built together. This podcast is self-made and self-produced, which is why you will hear a short ad at the beginning of each episode. These ads, along with the support from subscribers and patrons, enable me to keep delivering this podcast for free to those who need it. Thank you to everyone who shared their words of gratitude with me during the week, whether through the website or your podcast app by leaving a comment or review and rating. Your messages mean the world to me. My goal is to keep this podcast free and accessible for those who need it. In addition to that quick ad from Spotify at the beginning of each episode, there are other ways you can help support the podcast. You can always follow the podcast in your podcast app and leave a comment. You can always become a subscriber for $2.99 per month to remove those Spotify ads and support episode creation. If subscribing is not possible, and I completely understand if it is not, then simply leaving a review and rating in your podcast app. Even one sentence really helps out. You can always say hello to me at boreyouTosleep.com. Another way to show gratitude is by sharing the podcast with someone who needs it. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the readings. A Book of Bridges by Walter Shaw Sparrow. Prefatory note. Literary projects may be put in two classes. Some are like steamers that go in a regulated course direct to their destinations, while others tack here and there like sailing ships, governed by a zigzag progress. The subject of bridges belongs to this latter class. For 25 years, I have tried to order it into a methodized hobby. As well, try to teach a hive of honey bees never to visit certain flowers in a garden, and never to fly beyond certain pathways and hedges. Yet a writer cannot help rebelling when his chosen theme declines to play in the game of authorship, and deviates from many careful plans which are made for its benefit. Every chapter in this book has been rewritten 8 or 10 times, yet my sailing ship has not become an Atlantic liner. My wish for a long time was to show the evolution of bridges in about 700 photographic illustrations, with 8 lines of text under each print, and in preparation for this work, I collected materials and received invaluable help from other pontiffs, particularly from Mr. Frank Brangwyn, Mr. H. T. Crofton, Mr. C. S. Sargison, Mr. Edgar Wingram, the Reverend O. M. Jackson, and the Church Missionary Society. Pontist after pontist sent me notes, photographs, sketches, and then Frank Brangwyn suggested that we should work in collaboration. Here was luck indeed. His pictures and drawings would be the book of art, and the rambling subject if it passed over mere technique into the human drama, or to interest the general reader who does not generally read. For bridges have represented types of society, every change in their development having been brought about by changes in social needs. One thing more than any other is attractive to a pontist. It is the varied strife that bridges and roads have circulated, not only in military campaigns, but in the thronged struggle for existence. The one incessant war in the affairs of men, a routine of idle sentiment, prattles about an illusion named peace. Yet strife everywhere remains the historian of life. Every effort to do and to live claiming a battle toll of killed and wounded and maimed. Even sleep, the nearest kinswoman of peace, is united to the law of battle by dreams that torture. A pontist, then, when studying the strife that roads and bridges have distributed, must clear from his mind the fanciful ideas that pacifism has invented. He is an adventurer in history, not an idler in a world of visions. Today, above all, he is called upon to see the truth, because Europe, driven by the rival motive powers of hostile ideals, has passed from industrial strikes and contests into other phases of necessary warfare. Once more differing civilizations will have their worth tested to the full on stricken fields, and once more roads and bridges will dominate the military tactics and strategy. The Great War broke out when my last chapter was nearly finished, and its early events illustrate and confirm the main arguments which I have tried to make as clear as possible, so that no person may think of bridges apart from their historic service to mankind. During many centuries, for example, all strategical bridges were fortified. Then a gradual decline began, and it culminated in the defenseless modern bridge that sappers blow up in a few minutes. Bridge builders everywhere have so much good sense to regain from the science of national defense, a very difficult science today, for many of its methods are being rendered obsolete by airships and aeroplanes. So a book on historic bridges could not be published at a time more opportune than the present moment. Chapter 1. On the Study of Bridges and Roads. A pontist or devotee of bridges ought to be envied and pitied. His work is marvellously attractive, but he cannot hope to learn even a 20th part of the discoverable history which has circulated along highways. Indeed, the history goes back to a time that preceded the descent of man, a primal time when every bridge was made by nature, and when footpaths and tracks were the runs and spoor of wild animals, many of which were huge enough to plough their way through deep jungles, and to trample wide paths through the undergrowth of virgin forests. There were 8 or 9 sorts of natural bridges, and they were all useful to the many quadrupeds that travelled far in their search for prey and forage. To meditate on this fact is to visualize many probable happenings. Vivid pictures live before the mind's eye, and in one I see how a full-grown iguanodon, after gorging all day in a ravaged weald, was overcome by sleep of glutted hunger as he tried to cross a big fallen tree that bridged a chasm nearby his lair under a rock shelter. And a flock of little bright birds came and settled on the 70 feet of body and tail, just to pick up vermin. Why not? Life everywhere has fed on lives. Something has died and suffered a resurrection of vitality. Whenever appeased hunger has renewed the health of an organism. And this picture of Audacious Iguanodon and his bird friends attracts me for two reasons. It reminds me that bridges throughout their history have circulated strife, and it represents the perpetual law of battle that rules creatively over living creatures, like foul manure over gardens and harvest fields. A pontist then must try to see clearly, under a form of visual conception, what part his subject played in the earliest war of organic life, when natural bridges aided the first animals not only to hunt over great territories, but to migrate from their first homes into lands very far away. In the second chapter, we shall try to feel the inspiring pressure of events which must have acted during the descent of man on a brain remarkable for its imitative faculties. Perhaps we can get into imaginative touch with our earliest ancestors. Perhaps we can find ourselves a vestige of their aboriginal nature, and then we shall know, by a sympathy which we shall not question, how each natural bridge helped them in their wanderings, and became a model to be copied and adapted and improved. Such is the beginning of our enviable studies, but their end is never reached. Not even the long days and years of Hilper and Shalom in Addison, where antediluvian seconds endure about as long as our trivial minutes, would be enough for a complete study of bridges and roads, viewed as inestimable servants to the common weal of mankind. A complete study would follow their evolution through 8 worldwide subjects: architecture, civil engineering, antiquarian research, the development of trade and commerce from primitive barter, social wayfaring, war and its red tragedies, the longevity of barbaric customs, usages, traditions, and the ups and downs of fortune in the slow fever called progress, whose clinical thermometer has been tribal and national enterprise, and whose gradual features on the temperature of bodies civil have produced many withering crises fatal to civilizations. These 8 subjects are vastly intricate as well as worldwide. In scope they are infinite if we compare their magnitude with the brief seasons of our perishable days. Let us then ask ourselves a question. How much may we expect to learn about bridges and roads, the distributive agents of all human aims and ambitions? Suppose we live to be 80 years and 10, and suppose we work gladly for 8 hours a day from the age of 15 to that of 70, encouraged by perfect health and so delighted with our work that we rescue Sunday from a Sabbatarian inertia, and lose no time at all by being drudges to the holiday mania. For a pontist never need be idle. Not only has he 1,000 problems to reconsider, but in all his walks and rides he is a wayfarer with his hobby. when he feels certain he can visit a detestable railway bridge and drink the wormwood of pessimism, and when for a whole week he has tried in vain to follow a devious fact through all of its golf ball antics from bunker to bunker. Let him go to a classic bridge such as the Pentua Trajan over the Tagus at Alcantara, or let him be as delighted a pupil to Turner's Walton Bridges, or to Brangwen's magnificent vision of the Pont Saint-Benazet at Avignon. From time to time, also after paying his rates and taxes, a pontist should recall to memory the rare great finds which his long research has unburied. To enjoy a find properly is to feel sure that one has made a gallantry entry into El Dorado. Never shall I forget the elation that came to me when at the same moment I came upon two wondrous facts. First, that nature had created lofty arched bridges, like the Rock Bridge in Virginia, and the Pont d'Arc over the Ardèche in France. Next, that the earliest archways in handicraft were copied from nature's models, and copied with a plodding mimicry, for they were built not with converging arched stones, but with courses of stone laid horizontally, just as nature in stratified rocks had put one flat layer upon another. To discover facts of this kind is a joy that keeps the heart youthful. Study is not a friend to the income tax, but it puts trouble out of my mind. A true Nepenthe, even aged scientists at the Pasteur Institute grow young and merry when they isolate a virulent microbe which for a long time has baffled their curiosity. Yes, research ought to be very popular. In its companionship, any person of sense may learn gladly, as an old boy from his 15th year to the 17th, working daily for 8 hours throughout the day. How many hours in all would be given to study and thought? In 55 years there are 20,075 days. These we multiply by 8, and behold, we have been sedulously youthful for 160,000 hours. Here is a record of industry. It may be unexampled until centenarians become as frequent as M. Matinkoff wants them to be. And yet, after all, is it a great record? Great it may be in relation to human weakness, but it means only a trivial apprenticeship to any vocation that lures the mind with illuminable open fields. Our happy toil is nothing more than a gleaner, but it should keep us from being prigs, little students overfed on a little knowledge and too foolish to feel ignorant. What Sir Clifford Allbutt has told the public about the immaturity of modern science is true also of the study of bridges and roads. Here too, knowledge is often hollow, while ignorance has a solid weight, even among men who are not content with current formulas. In every direction we seem to travel but a very short way before we are brought to a stop. Our eyes are open to see that our path is beset with doubts, and that even our best made knowledge comes but too soon to an end. In every chapter arises problem after problem to beckon us on to farther investigation. Yet this way and that we are so baffled by darkness and ignorance that we choose one of those problems for attack, one which is likely to repay his labour, is often beyond the scope of a junior candidate. Not that a young man should be very humble in his choice of a problem, for it is with students as with empire makers, who would do very little if a bold indiscretion were unfruitful. Let us have faith in the sunburnt cockiness of extreme youth. when it hunts the far horizon as if mirages of self-deception were the butterflies of ambition, easy to catch and easy to perceive. It is guided by the genius of research, and certainly it has done far more for the world than will ever be done by reasoning caution that looks too far ahead. About 25 years ago, when I began in my leisure time to be a pontist, a good old slippered antiquary gave me some hints on what he called a discreet fervour in the study of bridges. I was to choose an English county, perhaps Derbyshire, and for 8 or 9 years I was to live all day long with the bridges, getting them photographed from many points of view, and recovering bits of their stories from dusty old records and forgotten monument chests. Then a clay-cold book in 2 volumes was to be written, with a frigid zeal for the accuracy of minute data, and with enough glacial footnotes on every page to strike terror into that general reader who does not generally read. No thought at all was to be given to the public, whose vulgar mind had neglected the many antiquaries who had told the historic truth unflinchingly, with a desperate effort to be impartial, unemotional, and yet effective also, like icebergs. I told my adviser that his ideals were those of a studious millionaire. He could afford to write without heart and to be pleased with a bad circulation, could afford also to forget that old English bridges, though at times as charmingly rustic as the Robin Hood ballads, were not great masterpieces of art, like a good many old bridges of the continent. If I invited readers to dine with me on Brazil nuts, unaided by nutcrackers, how in the world could I expect to receive company? But argument was useless. The antiquary had 2 homes, himself and the past, and in both he lived as a rapt dreamer. I see him still, a lean and dusty figure, unkempt, unwashed, for he hated immersion like Dr. Johnson. His favourite aim, and he never realized it, was to put a spade tenderly against a human skull buried in Pliocene deposits. I would sooner do that, he declared one evening, than be married to all of the prettiest women in England. Girls, not widows, of course. Courage was not his forte, except in one pugnacious habit which he shared with most antiquaries. Not only did he love facts with a zeal that was always ready to defend them, but he regarded every fact as a big truth. The old man would say to me, for instance, hunt in the Middle Ages for common but shining truths about roads and bridges. Ah yes, there's the fact that many bridges were property owners. Their landed estates were sometimes inconsiderable, to be sure, like the noble parks of Lilliput, but each estate, whether large or small, was a great truth in the history of bridges. And I like to remember the good folk who in their wills bequeathed money to their favourite bridges, like Count Neville, who in 1440 left £20 to Alshway Bridge, near Middleham. Now and then the testator was a skinflint, like John Danby, who in 1444 left in his will a beggarly 6 and 8pence to Whalley Bridge. Yes, and he was rash enough to die unrepentant. Another man, a notable merchant in his day, Roger Thornton of Newcastle, was clever enough to save himself from oblivion. A merchant's destiny by leaving 100 marks to the Tyne Bridge in his native town, a bridge, by the way, that needed much renovation. But Thornton in his charity struck a hard bargain. The 100 marks would not be paid unless the Mayor and ye Commons released the testator from certain actions at law. Thornton died in 1429, and to show you that the beautiful truth which I am illustrating was not then historically juvenile, I will mention an earlier fact from the life of a Newcastle citizen, John Cook, by name, who in 1379 bequeathed 20 marks to the forfeited bridge at Warkworth. The old man gossiped quaintly about his truths, but when he wrote about them he was legal in profuse entanglements. Then it seemed to him that truth could not be protected by too many fortifications. Had he looked upon facts as facts, mere things which had happened and which had no future, his antiquarian knowledge would have been less arid. But he belonged to a school of pedants, the same school which either kills antiquarian magazines or enables them to live obscurely on unpaid contributions. That a man's life work should be futile to the public, a mere cemetery where facts lie buried like fossils in a rock, is pitiful. Yet antiquaries are very proud of their barren labour. Scarcely one of them understands that a fact, however entertaining, has no value to thought unless it is a useful item in a mass of corroborative evidence, and even then it can be nothing more than a fact, a thing to illustrate the perpetual action of an absolute truth, or the increasing worth of a given hypothesis, or the general belief in a given theory. 2 or 3 facts that confirm each other justify a guess, a random shot or a vague suspicion. An important collection of such facts, if it continues to grow, gives validity to a hypothesis, and when from many sources as various as they are, many new facts are added year after year to the collection, until at last the cumulative evidence holds the field with the best judges. Then we know that the hypothesis has been developed into a theory, the highest form of mobile knowledge in the realms of thought. But a theory is not absolute truth, of course. It is a harbour where knowledge rests while thought is on the high seas, a Columbus searching for new worlds. From a guess to a theory, this, then, is the architecture of constructive growth that research and revision build with facts. And if we as Pontus wish to think clearly and humanely, we must use facts as a means to a worthy end, as architects employ their materials. One by one, facts are to us what a few slates and tiles are to a builder. But thought collects them, and then with care and inspiration she builds with them as she builds with stones and bricks and timber. In her work, moreover, there is nothing little when she does little things admirably, but when her devotees go away from her and her parade, guesswork as theory and fact as truth, we should ask them whether brick kilns are houses and stone quarries cathedrals. Today, unhappily, most people exalt facts into truths, and very often the great word theory is a journalistic term for any supposition that is loose or wayward or foolish. Thus, Mrs. Jones has a mere theory that her husband is hard at work when he remains in town after office hours. From the life of Bridges we may draw a great many conjectures, suppositions, speculations, suggestions, fancies, ideas, and here and there we may find some attractive hypotheses, notably those that concern the introduction of pointed arches into French bridges, and of ribbed arches into English bridges. Are there any truths, any useful and necessary things that repeat and confirm themselves age after age? Yes. There are some technical truths that belong for all time to the mechanics of bridge building. The world can employ them forever, and always with the same good results, if engineers and architects work competently. There is also a great social truth in the life of bridges and roads, namely that types of society are as old as their systems of circulation, just as women and men are as old as their arteries. So the condition of a body social can be judged accurately if we examine with care its landways and waterways. In Spain, for example, where the genius of modernity is inactive, and where fine bridges represent many dead social states, Roman, Moorish, medieval, and Renaissance, the past reigns over the highways, sometimes as an inspiration, as in the great and vast bridge at Ronda, but usually as a mournful historian. Even in those parts of Spain where trade endeavours to be modern, workmen have time enough to be honest craftsmen. Their metal bridges are not uncouth, and their stone bridges are charmed with hints taken from classic models. They do not progress, for they keep far off that from spirit of trade which regards the lies of advertising as proofs of a push for honour. From a modern standpoint, then, Spain does not live except as a dim reflection of her long ago. A Pontist has few theories to consider, only two indeed, and these are sisters. Let me introduce you to them. The first theory sets thought astir on the necessity of having landways and waterways, which in all respects are fitted to distribute the many functional activities of military and civil life. It is not enough that a complex type of society should have many intricate systems of circulation for its multiform traffic. The weakest points in each system ought to be regarded as danger zones in the strategy of national defense, so it is a duty to protect them from attack, and the protection should be as complete as the military acts can make it, age after age. Now the most vulnerable points in a system of landways are the long bridges by which roads and railways are conducted across wide chasms, and deep valleys and perilous waterways. Yet in England and in other countries also, neither roads nor railways are defended. Indeed, modern bridges are not only unfortified, but as sensitive to bombs as elephants are to large bullets. Why has the world forgotten that a powerful nation whose bridges were cut would be like a giant whose arteries were severed? As the suffragettes burnt down Yarmouth Pier, so a conspiracy of civil order, acting in accordance with a well-formed plan, could in a night, with a few sappers, cripple a vast railway by blowing up the main strategic bridges. I am giving a chapter to this urgent subject, most engineers having evaded with equal zest the charm of beauty and the security of our food supplies. At a time when the nations overarm themselves for war, tradesmen and engineers have erected ugly bridges for an unimagined peace. But now that the art of flying threatens civilization from overhead and from all around, like a new Saturn, the public attitude to highways cannot remain lethargic. Willingly or unwillingly, we must recall and renew those principles of defensive war, with the help of which bridges were safeguarded by the Romans, and also in the Middle Ages. Frank Brangwyn has painted many aged fortified bridges, making a most varied selection, and in each of these historic pictures he illustrates the attitude of the old times to the theory of Pontine defense. The apathy of the public has been unintelligent, but not unintelligible, because bridges and roads are so ordinary, so very trite, that we who use them every day do not think of their supreme influence on the nation's health and safety. They belong to that realm of custom where truths fall asleep in truisms and facts in platitudes. To understand a thing that seems obvious or inevitable is among the problems that genius alone can solve in a complete way. Dr. Johnson believed that men and women could marry without being in the least intrepid, because custom would soon teach them not to know the difference between good looks and bad. As custom dulls our minds even in family life, where affection is most watchful, we cannot be surprised that common roads and bridges are too evident to be seen intelligently. And that concludes tonight's readings. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this story, and if you're not quite tired yet, please feel free to listen to another episode of the Boy to Sleep podcast. Until next time, good night.